Being a leader means having influence, nothing more and nothing less. Whether you're going to be a coach, a doctor, a teacher, or any other professional, you need to learn how to influence someone. How do you influence someone, and how do you get them to change a certain behavior or listen to you? It's not that easy. Are there any traits that you need in order to be a good influencer? No. Take a look at Princess Diana and Mother Teresa in our textbook. Princess Diana was the wife of King Charles and came from a high social class. That isn't what made Diana be a good influencer. Diana gained her influence by rallying people to causes such as AIDS research, having care for people with leprosy, and putting a ban on landmines. She wanted to do good in the world. Mother Teresa, on the other hand, was in the opposite social class from Diana. Mother Teresa was a small, elderly Catholic nun born in Albania who served the poorest of the poor in Calcutta, India. That tells you that you don't have to be the richest or high social class in order to gain influence. These two ladies were opposites and they both did good in the world, so that's what made them a good influencer. Anyone that wants to be a good influencer can achieve it by following these tips. The first tip that I want to give you is that no matter how hard you try, you cannot change someone. They have to want to change themselves. If you can't possibly change someone, then what do? You have to encourage them. You can encourage and influence that person to change, but at the end of the day, they have to be the decision maker and they have to change their behavior. You may see the true potential a person could have once they change a certain behavior. You can talk and have a long, meaningful, drawn-out conversation with them on how that you want them to change, but in the end, they still have to make that decision to change. Let's take a look at some real-world examples of how people might try to change other people and influence them to change. Let's say you're in a relationship, and every time your significant other talks, they cuss. You don't want them to cuss because when they cuss, it puts a bad influence on how other people see you. So the law of influence plays two roles in this scenario. The first is that you want to influence that person to stop cussing, and the other is that they're already influencing other people's thoughts about you and them. In the end, your significant other has to be the one to make that decision to stop cussing. Maybe you're a coach and you need to influence your players to have sportsmanship and stop acting so ignorant when they lose. You ultimately can't make them be a good sport toward other players after they lose the game. Maybe you're a doctor and you want to influence a patient's behavior on how they see and how they are thinking about a certain diagnosis that you just gave them. You can encourage them and tell them it's going to be all right, but in the end, they have to change their thinking towards that diagnosis. Maybe you're a preacher and a member of the church has a family member that just passed away. You want to influence that church member's way of thinking about death, and you want them to think about death in a more positive way. In all these scenarios, you have a chance to influence the person, but you can't change them or make them think in a different way. You can only encourage them to do so. You've heard the phrase to do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. So the second tip that I want to give you is the actual law of influence. And it's a little bit different from that. The law of influence is act around others as you would have others act around you. You have to walk the way you talk. If you want your girlfriend or boyfriend to stop cussing, you shouldn't cuss. If you want your players to have good sportsmanship, you should have good sportsmanship too. If you want your patient to be positive, you as a doctor has to be positive about that same diagnosis. If you want a church member to look at death in a more positive way, they need to see that you look at death in that positive way too. Let's take a look at Jesus, for example. His main goal was to influence his followers and disciples and to turn away from sin. How did he accomplish this goal? He never sinned. He acted the same way that he wanted his followers to act. The third tip that I want to give you is don't harass a person about their wrongful behavior. Don't tell them to stop cussing or stop drinking or stop smoking. All that's going to do is make things worse. They may get mad at you. They'll listen to what you said and it'll go in one ear and right out the other. And we don't want that. We've all tried to change at least one person in our lives and we've seen how that went. It doesn't work. The next tip that I want to give you is try to distract that person and keep them focused on something else besides that problem or that behavior that you want them to change. If you're a soccer coach and a player only uses his right foot, Challenge that player to use his left foot for the whole game. If you're trying to get a person to stop drinking alcohol, tell them how good a new drink is, whether it's a soft drink or Gatorade. This will influence that person to stop drinking alcohol and focus on that new drink or try something new. If you want to influence someone's opinion or viewpoint on death, tell them about what and who they will encounter when they do die and get to heaven. The next tip that I want to give you is reward good behavior. If a person hasn't done that bad behavior in a while or actually changes the way that they think about a certain behavior, give them a compliment. Tell them how proud you are of them because compliments make people feel good about themselves and make them want to do even better. The next tip that I want to give you is be a role model. Whether you want to influence a family member, a friend, or even a fan, you have to be a good role model. This tip goes back to tip number 2. You have to act like you want others to act around you, and even when they're not around you. So they can't wait to be just like you. And if they want to be like you, you want to set a good example for that person to follow. The next thing that I want to tell you about is to watch out for negative influence. Negative influences can be detrimental to our health and lifestyles. We have to learn how to watch out for bad people so we don't fall victim to peer pressure. How can someone influence people to do bad things? Well, it's kind of just like the way people can influence to do better. What gets those people to listen? They use some of the same influences just backwards and in a bad way. They know that a person ultimately has to make that bad decision. They act and they do bad things around people in order to make those other people do those same bad things. They try not to harass people so that they can stay away from the police and they don't get in trouble. They try to distract and lie to people and say things like, "It won't hurt you," or "It tastes and it feels so good." If you listen to them, they can influence you to make bad decisions. They used the law of influence in a negative way and used it against you. No one ever said the law of influence always had to be positive, so we need to watch out and avoid people who use the law of influence in a negative way. Now, the last tip that I'm going to give you is to influence and help the younger generation. When you get older and you decide you've had a good run, look back and help the younger generation. Help your grandson or your granddaughter or someone in the neighborhood that's very young, so they don't make the same mistakes that you did growing up. Tell them stories and lead them in the right direction so that they can be great influencers and great leaders. So let's take a look at some real world influencers and the tips that they use best. Let's look at Kobe Bryant, possibly the GOAT of basketball, the greatest of all time. What was his best tip that he used? He was a great role model. No matter what he was doing on the court or off the court, he was always setting a good example and being a role model for his fans. The next person that we want to take a look at is The Undertaker. He was a wrestler when he was in the 70s and he wrestled for 30 plus years. The tip that he used the best was helping the younger generation. Once he got older and he stopped wrestling in his prime, he wanted to help others succeed, like Roman Reigns when he broke the streak and Brock Lesnar when Brock Lesnar broke his WrestleMania streak. He was helping those wrestlers so they could make a name for themselves. Now let's look at Jesus. Jesus' best tip was acting around others as you would have them act around you. No matter what he did, he was always trying to show them not to sin, and he was not sinning so they would not sin. And that's one of his greatest tips. Now he has more followers than anyone in the world, and he's dead, but he's risen, so he still has more followers than anyone in the world. Now, remember what you have to do to be a good influencer. You can't change someone. You have to act around others as you would have them act around you. Don't harass people about their wrongful behavior. Distract the person and keep them focused on something else besides that problem. Reward good behavior. Be a good role model. Watch out for negative influences. And last but not least, influence and help the younger generation when they're coming up. So you can influence someone every day if you want to. This world is filled with so much stress and so many bad influences. you can be the good influence in someone else's life that encourages someone to change their life for the better. There are many personal experiences that I have encountered with the law of influence. Instead of telling you all those personal experiences I've had, I'm going to tell you how I live the law of influence every single day of my life. I'm a Christian, so every day I try to influence other people's behavior by trying to act just like Jesus did. I, tr- I try to let other people see my light shine to let them know that there's still good in the world. In this speech, I hope I've taught you what the law of influence is all about, and I hope I've influenced you and encouraged you to do and be good in the world and to change the world. In the end, remember it's always up to you to make that decision. So be a good influencer and go out and influence everybody. Thank you.